Keanu Reeves boarded his private jet for a simple flight to Tokyo. He'd never expected to crash land on a forgotten island with no signal, no cameras, and no way out. But what happened next didn't just delay his journey. It forced him to confront a question he hadn't asked in decades. Who is he when no one's watching? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The engines whispered to life beneath him, steady and smooth, as Keanu Reeves settled into his seat aboard the modest but sleek Gulfstream jet. The hum of pre-flight checks echoed faintly from the cockpit. It was early morning in Los Angeles, the kind of gray sky that hung low with fog, offering no sunrise. Just a gradual fade from night to pale light. Keanu leaned back in his seat, exhaled slowly, and stared at the leather-bound folder in his lap. Inside were handwritten notes. Not lines for a film, not promotional talking points, just reflections. Thoughts he'd jotted down in moments between shoots and long drives home. He was headed to Tokyo to deliver the keynote at a humanitarian film summit. It was a gathering of directors, actors, and nonprofit leaders focused on how storytelling could inspire global action. His topic, legacy, what we leave behind, and who we become in the process. It wasn't a paid gig. He had turned down a major studio event to make time for this. He hadn't told many people why. Across the aisle, his assistant Clara was double-checking a schedule on her tablet. Her brow furrowed slightly, but she didn't say much. She never needed to. Clara had been with him for nearly a decade, calm, unshakable, and always 5 steps ahead. The only time she'd ever shown nerves was when she'd had to interrupt a live interview to tell him his sister was back in the hospital. Closer to the rear cabin, Jordan flipped through his binder full of printed research. He was young, maybe 24, with boundless curiosity and just enough nervous energy to spill his coffee during takeoff. Keanu had invited him on this trip as a kind of quiet mentorship. Jordan had written a thoughtful essay about the impact of Reeves's lesser-known films on mental health awareness. It had ended up on Keanu's desk. Now the kid was along for the ride. "Cabin secure," came the voice of Captain Eli through the intercom. Keanu smiled at the familiar tone. Eli had flown him for years. Discreet, loyal, and a fellow lover of old westerns. Keanu trusted him with his life. More than once he had. The plane began taxiing slowly toward the runway, and Keanu opened a small leather book. Japanese poetry, Basho and Issa. Simple words that struck like thunder when read in silence. He traced one with his thumb and let the words settle. Do not seek to follow in the footsteps of the wise. Seek what they sought. He looked out the window as the city slipped behind them. The wheels lifted. He felt the quiet lurch in his stomach as they rose into the pale sky. Another journey, another country, another speech. But this time, something felt different. 20 minutes into the flight, the cabin found its rhythm. The seatbelt signs dimmed. Clara unwrapped a protein bar and offered Keanu one, but he shook his head gently. He wasn't hungry. Not yet. Instead, he reached for a pen and scribbled a note on the margin of his speech. Legacy isn't what follows your name, it's what echoes in someone else's silence. He underlined it twice, then set the pen down and closed the folder. He wasn't sure why this speech felt heavier than others. Maybe it was the audience. Many of the attendees in Tokyo were former child refugees, nonprofit workers, or filmmakers who had risked their lives in war zones just to record the truth. These weren't industry insiders or celebrity fans. These were people who had lived the stories most actors only pretend to survive. He felt honored to be among them, but also slightly unworthy. What could he possibly say that would matter to them? He glanced at Jordan, who was now peering through the window with quiet wonder. "First time over the Pacific?" Keanu asked, his voice calm. Jordan turned, eyes wide. "Yeah, it's endless. Like the ocean has no memory of where you started? Keanu nodded. But it remembers every wave. That silenced Jordan for a moment. Keanu looked down at his hands, scarred in a few places, strong but tired. Hands that had held so many props, touched so many scripts, but also buried loved ones and held strangers in moments of pain. His hands had built nothing grand, no companies, no monuments, but he hoped they had steadied people when it mattered. The intercom came alive again. "We're cruising at 40,000 feet, Eli said. Smooth skies ahead." Keanu leaned his head back. He thought of the orphanage in Nagoya that he'd once visited after filming, how the children had hugged him not because he was famous, but because he'd sat on the floor and drawn silly pictures with them. One of those kids had sent him a letter last month, now in high school, studying to become a nurse. That was the story he really wanted to tell. The aircraft interior was quiet, just the soft hum of altitude and the occasional click of a page turning. Clara had put on headphones. Jordan was dozing off. Keanu stared at the horizon line beyond the clouds. He didn't know that this would be the last time he'd see it from this altitude, for nearly 2 days. That soon the ocean would become more than just a metaphor. That somewhere out there, beneath that endless blue, a tiny island waited. And on that island, a barefoot man with no phone, no audience, and no idea who Keanu Reeves was about to change his life. Time passed slowly in the air. Keanu stood briefly to stretch his legs, walking the length of the cabin in quiet steps. His back ached from hours of stillness, the cost of old stunts and older grief. He reached the galley, poured a glass of water, and leaned on the small counter. Through the narrow porthole, the Pacific gleamed like hammered metal, sunlight rippling off its surface in 1,000 broken mirrors. He took a sip and watched. Behind him, Clara stirred, glancing up to check on him. He offered a slight nod. She returned it and went back to her screen. He appreciated that about her. She never hovered, she never pried. She held space for his silence, like it was part of the job. He returned to his seat and reopened the poetry book. He wasn't reading now, just holding it, like a relic of something that made sense. A few pages were dog-eared. Some had scribbled circles or question marks. In one margin, he'd written, "The most important things I've done weren't seen." His fingers paused on that sentence. The world often measured him by roles and box office numbers, but the moments that stayed with him weren't televised. They were late-night phone calls with a grieving friend, quiet visits to children's wards, a stranger who once stopped crying because he offered them stillness. He looked out again. They were somewhere over the Mariana Trench now. Below them, the deepest part of the known ocean. He wondered, abstractly, how many forgotten things rested there. Lost ships, old dreams, questions no longer asked. The captain's voice broke the quiet. "Mr. Reeves, just a quick heads up. We've got a light storm pattern up ahead. Nothing serious, just some mild turbulence for the next hour." Keanu responded with a calm, "Thanks, Eli," and set the poetry book down. Clara and Jordan looked up briefly. "Everything good?" Jordan asked, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Keanu nodded. "Just some bumps." Jordan chuckled nervously. "I'll try not to spill my coffee this time." Keanu gave a small smile. "It's a good test of balance." The jet continued forward, cutting through sunlight and distance. None of them knew yet that within hours the world they'd taken for granted, signal, speed, plans, would vanish into the hush of palm leaves and the scent of rain on warm dirt. And in that stillness, far from the noise of cameras and premieres, Keanu Reeves would be asked one question by a stranger, a question that would change everything. The sun had risen higher over the Pacific, casting a clean light across the open ocean. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere remained calm, though a subtle shift had begun. Keanu felt it before he heard it, a soft vibration in the floor, a faint tension in the air. like a held breath. Then the captain's voice came through the intercom, smooth but a shade more serious than before. "Ladies and gentlemen, just a quick update. We're picking up some weather activity ahead. Looks like a developing system over the Western Pacific. Nothing dramatic yet, but we're adjusting course slightly to stay clear of the heaviest cells. Shouldn't be more than mild turbulence." Keanu looked up from his thoughts and made eye contact with Clara, who raised an eyebrow. He gave her a small nod. Nothing unusual. For now. Jordan, however, was sitting up straighter. He was gripping the armrest, not white-knuckled, but close. "You okay?" Keanu asked. "Yeah," Jordan replied quickly, forcing a laugh. "I just don't love turbulence. I know it's safe, just..." Yeah. Keanu reached into the front pocket of his travel bag and pulled out a small tin. "Ginger candy," he said, handing one over. "It helps. We used to take this on set during fight scenes, especially on 47 Ronin. A few of us got motion sick filming those spinning temple sequences." Jordan took the candy with a grateful smile. "Thanks. That movie had some insane camera work." Keanu leaned back. "Also had a horse that bit people." "Not in the script." That made Jordan laugh and the tension eased. The aircraft began to bump slightly, a slow rhythm of dips and rises like waves beneath a small boat. Nothing serious, just the atmosphere letting them know they weren't alone. Clara put down her tablet and buckled her seatbelt. She didn't speak, but her movements were precise, practiced. Keanu watched the cabin around him. The jet was solid. He trusted Eli and the crew, but something in his gut stirred. He had flown enough to know the difference between routine weather and trouble. 15 minutes later, the turbulence intensified. The soft bumps turned to sharp jolts. The hum of the engines changed pitch, growing louder on one side. Then the intercom crackled again. "Mr. Reeves, this is Captain Eli. I need to speak with you directly." Clara stood and made her way to the cockpit, returning seconds later. "He wants you up front," she said. Keanu rose without a word. In the cockpit, Eli was scanning the instrument panel, focused but not panicked. "Whole of our engines is giving erratic readings," he said. "Could be a sensor issue, could be mechanical. We're going to play it safe and divert." "Where?" Keanu asked. "There's a small island called Fongale, about 40 minutes out. Remote, basic airstrip, but it's the best option given our location." Keanu took a breath. "Do it." Back in the cabin, Keanu returned to his seat. Clara looked at him, quietly asking for a read on the situation. "We're making an emergency landing," he said, calm but direct. "Island called Fongale? Remote, but safe." Jordan's eyes widened. "Wait, like an actual island, not an airport?" Keanu nodded. "Small airstrip, nothing fancy, but we'll be okay." Clara began securing her tablet and quietly notified the cabin crew. They moved with quick efficiency, strapping down loose items and communicating with hand signals. The jet tilted slightly as Eli adjusted course. Keanu felt the shift in pressure. Outside the window, clouds began to gather, thick and steel gray, curling at the edges like storm waves about to break. Jordan clutched the armrest again. "I knew I should have skipped coffee." Keanu looked at him and offered another piece of ginger candy. "You're here now. That matters." Another bump jolted the plane, harder this time. Clara looked up sharply. Keanu felt it too. A lurch that wasn't just turbulence. The right engine let out a low, grumbling whine. Not a stall, but close enough to make every seat go still. Eli's voice returned over the speaker. "We're about 25 minutes from Fongale. Expect some continued bumps as we pass through the edge of this weather system. We're monitoring the engine closely." Keanu leaned toward Jordan. "You trust pilots, right?" Jordan nodded quickly. "Good. This one's got nerves of stone. You're safe." Jordan tried to smile, but the fear hadn't gone. Not really. The plane shook again, an updraft that rocked the fuselage and made the overhead panels rattle. Clara closed her eyes briefly, lips moving in a silent breath. Keanu watched the ocean through the window. It looked calm from above. That strange illusion of peace, when chaos was building in the air itself. He thought back to another flight, years ago. A storm over Vancouver, a smaller plane, lightning crawling across the window like veins of fire. That one had ended fine, most do, but he remembered the feeling in his chest. This felt similar. The seatbelt signs flickered as the captain adjusted altitude. Keanu felt the descent begin. Slow, but steady. They were dropping out of the higher turbulence now, pushing lower toward a narrow patch of sky that still held light. Clara glanced at him. "How remote is this place?" Keanu shrugged. "Remote enough they don't have Starbucks." She gave him a flat look, then smiled despite herself. The jet banked slightly to the left, pressing them gently into their seats. The vibrations from the faulty engine had stabilized. For now. The silence in the cabin was heavy. Not fear, exactly. Just waiting. Keanu's eyes stayed fixed on the clouds ahead. Something about this wasn't just a detour. He could feel it. 12 minutes from their landing window, the clouds began to thin. Patches of deep blue sea appeared again, but the sky still churned in the distance. Thunder rumbled, low and far off. The right engine coughed. Not a full sputter, but a distinct, unsettling jolt in the rhythm of flight. Clara grabbed the edge of her seat and looked at Keanu. He turned to Jordan. "Put your head back. Breathe from your belly." Jordan obeyed. His hands trembled slightly. Keanu glanced forward. No panic in the crew, but this wasn't routine anymore. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now making our final approach to Fongolay Island. We're coordinating with local airstrip responders, but be advised, this is a remote location with limited services. We expect a firm landing, so please remain seated with your belts fastened. Cabin crew, prepare for descent." Keanu closed his folder, tucked it away, and looked out the window. At first, he saw only open ocean. Then, through the clouds, a narrow strip of land, green jungle, a faint beach, and a single line of pale concrete that curved like a scar through the island's belly. Fongolay. No towers, no city lights, just a small runway in the middle of nowhere. The cabin grew quiet. Keanu looked at Clara. She gave him a nod. Composed, but braced. Jordan was gripping the armrests again, but this time he didn't speak. He simply looked at Keanu as if searching for something steady. Keanu placed a hand over Jordan's for a moment. "We're going to land. We're going to walk off this plane. And someday this will be a story you tell someone else." Jordan swallowed hard and nodded. The island drew closer. The jet's nose tilted downward, angling in. Tension rippled through the fuselage as the landing gear deployed with a metallic groan. Keanu leaned back into his seat. He let his breathing slow, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The wheels touched. A hard impact. Not dangerous, but firm. The jet bounced once, then steadied. The brakes engaged. They slowed. The engines groaned. Then came stillness. The aircraft rolled to a stop at the far end of the strip. No terminal in sight, just trees, heat, silence. Clara exhaled. Jordan let out a shaky laugh. "We landed." Keanu looked through the window. A single man stood barefoot near the edge of the runway, holding a wrench. He didn't wave, he just waited. Keanu stared at the island. He had never heard of Fongolay before today. But something in his chest told him this wasn't just an emergency landing. It was an arrival. And whatever waited here wasn't part of any flight plan. The engines powered down with a final breath, and the silence that followed felt almost unnatural. No hum, no digital beeps, no rush of air conditioning or automated voices, just quiet, real quiet. Keanu remained seated for a moment longer, listening. Outside, there was only the sound of soft wind rustling through leaves and the occasional distant call of a seabird. No sirens, no footsteps, no traffic. The world had dropped its volume. Clara unbuckled and stood slowly, stretching her back. She looked around the cabin, then met Keanu's eyes. "Let's take stock," she said calmly. He nodded. Jordan stayed seated, staring out the window like someone waking from a strange dream. "It's so green," he murmured. Keanu stood and glanced through the window again. The island was lush with thick jungle, pushing right up to the edge of the narrow runway. Palm trees bent slightly in the breeze. The ocean glittered just beyond the dense brush. But there was no terminal, just a small structure off to one side, made of faded wood and corrugated metal, barely the size of a food truck. Keanu walked to the rear cabin door as one of the flight crew cracked it open. A wave of heat and humidity swept in like a curtain. The air smelled of salt and something rich, earthy, unfiltered. He stepped down onto the tarmac. The sun struck instantly, bright and hot, no buildings to shield them, just sky, sea, and forest. Clara followed, already pulling out a satellite phone. She extended the antenna and began pacing, holding it toward the open sky. "No bars," she muttered. "No response. I'll keep trying." Jordan descended the stairs with a little hesitation, looking around like he'd stepped into a painting. "It's beautiful," he said, "and kind of terrifying." "It's real," Keanu said. "All of it." He turned to the crew. They had begun removing luggage and basic supplies. No hangars, no carts, just hands. Without a word, Keanu joined them. He grabbed 2 duffel bags and carried them to the side of the strip, setting them carefully on the warm concrete. It was instinct, not performance. When something breaks down, you carry what you can. Clara glanced up from the sat phone and saw him lifting cases. She didn't stop him. Jordan looked surprised. "You don't have to do that." Keanu gave a small shrug. "Neither do you, but it helps." Jordan nodded and followed. They worked in silence for several minutes. The crew unloaded emergency kits, bottled water, extra fuel containers, a toolkit, and 2 folding chairs. One of the crew unfolded a tarp and clipped it to the wing for a patch of shade. Still, no sign of other people. Then Keanu spotted him. A figure standing at the edge of the trees, barefoot, holding a wrench, shirt stained with grease. Watching. Not waving, just waiting. The man stepped forward slowly, with the casual confidence of someone who belonged entirely to the ground he walked on. His feet padded soundlessly on the hot pavement. He wore faded green cargo shorts and a navy t-shirt bleached nearly gray by the sun. The wrench in his hand swung loosely at his side, like it was part of him. He stopped a few feet from the wingtip and looked at Keanu. "You folks all right?" he asked. His voice was smooth, low, and tinged with a soft island accent. His English was flawless. Keanu stepped forward. "We are now." The man's gaze moved to the aircraft, then back to Keanu. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. The engine sounded off coming in. "You made it just in time. We don't get many visitors." Clara approached, still holding the sat phone. "We're trying to contact our team. Communications are down." The man nodded. "Fongolay doesn't have cell towers. Closest network is 100 miles east, over water. But I've got a crank radio in the shed. Might get a signal at dusk." Keanu held out a hand. "I'm Keanu." The man looked at it, then smiled as he took it. Firm grip, no recognition in his eyes. "I'm Toma. I keep the airstrip working. I'm the mechanic, groundskeeper, and sometimes weather forecaster." Jordan stepped forward, unsure whether to speak. "I'm Jordan. This is... well, you probably know who this is." Toma looked between them. "Should I?" Jordan opened his mouth to answer, but Keanu gently put a hand on his arm. "It's all right," Keanu said. "Not important." Toma studied him a second longer, then nodded. "You're just folks who needed a place to land. That's enough." He gestured toward the old structure off the strip. "We've got some shade and water, nothing fancy, no power except what the generator gives, but you're welcome." They followed him down the path. The heat was thick but not unbearable. The breeze smelled like citrus and seaweed. As they approached the shack, Keanu noticed details that spoke of care. Tools were hung neatly on hooks. The roof, though patched with mismatched pieces, was tight and clean. A small bench stood just outside the door, shaded by a makeshift tarp that had clearly survived storms. Inside, the space was cool. Toma flipped a switch, and a fan kicked on with a low groan. "Generator's been holding up," he said. "She's old, but honest." Clara sat, wiping sweat from her forehead. Jordan hovered near the doorway, still absorbing the strangeness of it all. Toma reached into a cooler and pulled out a few bottles of water. "You're lucky the plane didn't need more than a place to stop. This runway sees one aircraft every few months." Keanu accepted the bottle and nodded. "Then today, you saved us." Toma leaned against the doorframe, sipping from a bottle of water, eyes scanning the sky, as if reading it like a page. "Storm's breaking up," he said. "You might get clearer weather tomorrow, maybe." Clara held up the satellite phone. "I've been trying every few minutes, nothing's gone through." Toma motioned toward a rusted radio box on the workbench. "You can try that later. At sunset it picks up better range. Depends on the clouds." Keanu sat on the edge of the bench, elbows on his knees. The air felt thick with questions, but none of them urgent. Not yet. Just a low hum of displacement, like the body adjusting to a new altitude. Jordan stood near the window, looking out across the landing strip. "It's like time doesn't move here," he said softly. Toma chuckled. "Oh, it moves, just not for the same reasons." Keanu glanced at him. "You ever leave the island?" "Left once," Toma replied, "to study in Manila. But I came back. My father got sick. After he passed, someone had to keep the strip alive. Planes don't land here often, but when they do, they need someone watching." Jordan tilted his head. "Isn't that lonely?" Toma looked out toward the sea. "It's quiet, but not lonely." Keanu felt the words settle inside him. He stood and walked a few steps outside. The trees rustled in the breeze, branches swaying gently like dancers at rest. Beyond them, he could see the edge of the island sloping down to the ocean. A single fishing boat drifted near the reef, its outline small against the blue. He turned back to Toma. "How long do you think we'll be here?" Toma shrugged. "Hard to say. Your captain's checking the damage. If it's just a sensor, could be fixed quick. If not, you'll need a part flown in from Guam or Yap. That takes time." Clara stepped out beside Keanu, shielding her eyes from the sun. "I'll keep trying the sat phone, but even if I get a signal, rerouting help out here isn't fast." Toma nodded. "That's island life. You learn to wait well." Keanu looked out again, then down at his hands. He wasn't tense. Not yet. But a part of him was listening. To the quiet, to the air, to something deeper he couldn't name. He turned to Toma and asked, "What do people usually do here when things stop working?" Toma smiled. "We fix what we can, and when we can't, we talk. We sit, we wait for the wind to change." Keanu nodded slowly. The plane had landed safely, the danger had passed. But something else had just begun. The sun had begun its slow arc toward the western trees when Toma reached down to adjust the heavy cables snaking from the old generator beside the shed. The machine groaned in protest, rattling slightly as the cooling fan wheezed through another cycle. Keanu stood nearby, crouched with one hand braced on his knee. He watched as Toma reached under the unit with a wrench, tightening something that squealed once before falling silent. "Want a hand?" Keanu asked. Toma glanced up. "Sure." "Grip that handle and tilt it forward, just enough so I can check the underside." Keanu moved around and gripped the rusted handle. The weight of the machine surprised him. Dense, awkward. He shifted his footing and steadied it, allowing Toma to slide underneath further. "Hold it like that for a second." Keanu nodded. "Got it." Toma tapped the casing, adjusted a bolt, and pulled himself out. He wiped his forehead with a cloth and stood, brushing grit from his arms. "You've done this before," Keanu said. Toma smiled. "She only complains when the salt gets into her coils. I've rebuilt her twice. Old things stick around longer when you treat them right." He gestured toward the workbench inside. "You want something cold?" Keanu followed. Inside, the air was still warm but shaded. Toma reached into a bucket and pulled out a green coconut, still wet with condensation. He chopped the top off with practiced efficiency and handed it to Keanu. "Fresh this morning," he said. "Best thing for the heat." Keanu took a sip. The water inside was cool and unexpectedly sweet, with none of the artificial taste he was used to from bottled versions. He looked at the coconut, then at Toma. "You don't know who I am, do you?" Toma paused, then shrugged. "You said Keanu? That's all I need. No movies? No internet out here? We've got DVDs, a battery TV. But I don't watch much, mostly documentaries. Old sailing footage, sometimes music videos. Why?" Keanu took another sip. "It's just most people recognize me. Or pretend they don't." Toma sat on the bench across from him. "I figure if someone lands here, they're not looking to be recognized. They're just looking for ground." Keanu nodded slowly. "That's fair." They sat in silence for a while, the kind that didn't demand filling. Just the hum of the generator now purring smoothly again, and the far-off sound of ocean waves brushing the reef. Toma stretched his legs. "This island has its own time," he said. "Things arrive when they arrive. People too." Keanu let that settle. "I can feel that," he said softly. And for the first time since the emergency, he allowed himself to rest in it. Toma stood and began organizing the tools on the wall. Each wrench, each screwdriver had its place. The order felt deliberate, almost reverent. Keanu watched for a moment, then rose to help. He reached for a socket set and held it up. "This go here?" Toma glanced over. "Right side, third hook." Keanu hung it carefully. "You like things where they belong," he said. Toma nodded. "When storms come, you need to know where everything is. The island doesn't wait while you fumble." Keanu smiled. "Hollywood's the opposite. Chaos every day. Different crew, different pace, different plan, and then it all disappears when the credits roll." Toma looked at him thoughtfully. "But you remember the people, right?" Keanu nodded. "The good ones, always." Toma returned a wrench to its place, then leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "You've seen a lot of places, I bet." Keanu took another drink from the coconut and stepped outside. "Too many to remember, but some stick. Places where things slow down. Places where no one's asking anything from you." Toma joined him, standing beside the weathered post that held up the tarp. "This island does that," he said. "It strips things down. No titles, no schedules. Just what you carry inside." Keanu nodded slowly. "That's rare." Toma motioned toward a nearby path shaded by banyan trees. "Want to walk?" Keanu followed without hesitation. The path was narrow but well-worn, the roots of the trees arcing like ribs beneath their feet. Birds scattered overhead, their wings flashing white against the canopy. The smell of citrus and salt was stronger here, mingling with the scent of something rich, maybe breadfruit roasting in a village oven nearby. "Do you live close?" Keanu asked. Toma pointed ahead. "Just beyond that ridge. A few houses. My sister, her husband, their kids. I stay by the strip. Easier to hear when something's wrong." Keanu walked quietly for a moment. "You ever want to leave again?" Toma shrugged. "Sometimes. But every time I think about it, something here pulls me back. A storm breaks, a neighbor needs help, or the airstrip needs patching. It's like the island says, 'Not yet.'" Keanu looked up at the canopy. The sun pierced through in broken shafts, painting golden spots on the forest floor. "That kind of commitment? It's not common, where I'm from." Toma glanced at him. Where are you from? Originally, Beirut, but mostly Toronto. Then, LA and everywhere else. Toma raised his eyebrows. Beirut? Keanu nodded. My father left early. My mom raised me. I've lived in a lot of places, but I'm not sure I've ever had one that felt like it chose me. They stopped at the edge of the trees where the land opened into a wide clearing. A single hammock swung between two palms. Toma smiled. Maybe this one's just saying hello. Keanu sat down in the hammock, the ropes creaking gently under his weight. It swayed slowly, carrying him with the breeze. Toma leaned against one of the palm trees, arms crossed. Funny thing is, most of the planes that land here never come back. Emergency stops, government deliveries, a few lost tourists, but everyone leaves changed. Keanu looked up at the sky. The clouds had shifted again, thinner now. The storm had moved on. I don't think I was supposed to be here, Keanu said. Toma nodded. None of us are, but sometimes where we land matters more than where we meant to go. Keanu was quiet. He thought about Tokyo, the summit, the speech that now felt like someone else's assignment. He turned to Toma. What do you get from all this? I mean, what keeps you here? Toma didn't answer right away. He stepped forward and pointed toward the airstrip, now barely visible through the trees. On time, a medical plane landed in a storm. Engine failing. Family on board, trying to get their mother to a hospital. We gave them shelter, fed them, got the engine patched. She survived. He turned back to Keanu. Ives. Terry wrote us a letter, said if the strip hadn't been here, she wouldn't have made it. That's why I stay. Keanu nodded slowly. You built something that matters. Toma smiled faintly. It's small, but sometimes small things catch the people falling from the sky. Keanu let the words settle. Back in Los Angeles, everything was measured in magnitude. Box office records, studio deals, viral headlines. But here, value was measured by stillness, by presence, by whether someone had water to drink and a safe place to land. Toma glanced at the sun, now dipping lower. Come on, he said. We should check the engine again. Your pilot might need help. Keanu stood, brushing sand from his pants. I'm not a mechanic. Toma grinned. Neither was I at first, but when something breaks, you learn fast. They walked back down the path, moving without rush. The trees parted as they neared the edge of the clearing, revealing the quiet aircraft resting under the shade of the wing tarp. Clara looked up from the bench, sat phone still in her hand. Any luck? Keanu asked. She shook her head. Not yet. Still trying. Jordan was asleep under one of the folding chairs, an arm slung over his eyes. Toma grabbed a toolbox from beside the shed and headed toward the plane. Keanu followed. The light was changing. The wind had cooled. There was no rush, no pressure. Just a machine to examine, a moment to be present, and a man named Toma, who didn't care who Keanu Reeves was, only that he had landed and that he was safe. The sun was high now, casting long fingers of light through the coconut palms as Keanu stepped away from the airstrip. Clara had given up trying the satellite phone for the hour and was resting on the bench in the shade. Jordan was still asleep, breathing evenly with one shoe missing and a leaf tangled in his curls. Keanu walked alone down a narrow path past the maintenance shed. Toma had pointed the way earlier with a casual flick of the wrist. It'll take you to the village, he'd said. No signs, just keep following the light. There was no pavement, no markers. The path bent through thickets of ferns and twisted roots that jutted up like small sculptures from the forest floor. The air was humid, but not oppressive. It smelled clean, with hints of salt and tree bark, and something floral he couldn't name. At a few minutes in, Keanu heard laughter. He stopped and turned toward the sound. To his left, in a sunlit clearing, 3 barefoot children were chasing each other through the tall grass. They held driftwood sticks, waving them like swords. One wore a towel tied like a cape. trailing behind him as he ran. Keanu watched in silence. There was no yelling, no crying, just the raw, rising sound of play, the kind that doesn't depend on toys or screens or instructions. One of the children noticed him and waved, not shyly, but without expectation, just a gesture of inclusion. Keanu waved back, and the game resumed as though his presence was part of the world already. He kept walking. The path opened near a row of small homes built from wood, tin, and woven leaves. Nothing fancy, but each one had a small porch, a chair or two, and laundry fluttering in the wind like colorful flags. No cars, no sounds of engines or phones, just roosters crowing, pots clinking, and a gentle rhythm that made time feel irrelevant. An elderly woman sat on a low bench beside one of the homes. Her hair was silver and pulled back into a neat bun. She wore a bright blue wrap dress and had a bowl of peeled fruit in her lap. When she saw Keanu, she didn't startle. She smiled and lifted her hand in greeting. He smiled back and nodded, pausing slightly. She pointed to the fruit and held up one finger, as if asking whether he wanted one. Keanu stepped forward and bowed his head in a quiet thank you. She handed him a slice of mango, warm and dripping with juice. He bit into it and nodded in appreciation. "Sweet," he said. She tapped her chest and said a word he didn't recognize. Then she pointed to the mango again. Keanu repeated the word softly. She smiled wider. He didn't ask for a photo, didn't try to record the moment. It was already full. Keanu continued walking through the village, letting his feet guide him rather than any map. The path wound between homes and gardens, each one quietly tended. He passed a man weaving rope from palm fiber. A group of women sat around a shared table, slicing root vegetables and singing in low voices. No one stopped what they were doing. No one asked who he was. He was simply there. The stillness of it all crept into him. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was the absence of rush. Every movement had purpose but not pressure. No glances at watches, no reminders buzzing in pockets. Time flowed like the breeze, constant, invisible, yet never questioned. At the edge of the village, Keanu came upon a small clearing, shaded by large breadfruit trees. A group of children were gathered around a chalkboard that had been nailed to the side of a tree. A woman stood before them, drawing shapes in white chalk, while the children called out answers in unison. There were no desks, just mats on the ground, no textbooks, just small slates and sticks of chalk. Keanu stood quietly under one of the trees and watched. The lesson ended with a song. The children clapped in rhythm, their voices rising into the humid air like birds taking flight. The teacher noticed him then and gave a polite nod. He stepped forward, returning the gesture. "Are you passing through?" she asked gently. "In a way," he replied. "Our plane had engine trouble. We landed nearby." She smiled. "Then you've been given a day." Keanu tilted his head. "What do you mean?" She pointed toward the forest behind them. "On Fangale, when something breaks, it's not a problem. It's a pause, a reminder that not everything needs to arrive on time." Keanu looked around. The kids were still singing softly, now playing a clapping game in pairs. He said quietly, "It's been a long time since I've seen a place like this." She studied him for a moment, then asked, "Are you someone people usually recognize?" He hesitated, then gave a small nod. "But not here." "Not here," he said. She smiled. "Then you're lucky." He watched the children a moment longer, then said thank you and turned back toward the path. As he walked, he realized his shoulders had dropped. His breath had deepened. The quiet was no longer unfamiliar. It was welcome. There was no script here, no stage, just walking, noticing, receiving. The path led him to a wooden bridge that crossed a slow-moving stream. He paused in the middle, resting his hands on the rail. The water below reflected the sky in soft ripples. And for the first time in years, Keanu Reeves felt completely, undeniably present. He stayed at the bridge for a while, listening. The stream gurgled lazily over smooth stones. Insects buzzed in the underbrush. A bird called out from the trees, answered by another somewhere deep in the canopy. Keanu looked up at the sky. The sun had moved noticeably. Still no signal. Still no emails. Still no expectation. Back in Los Angeles, his phone would have buzzed a dozen times by now. His assistant would have texted reminders. The publicist would be tracking press, and his calendar would be full of red notifications warning him of missed deadlines. But here, no one missed anything. Things simply waited. As he turned back toward the airstrip, he saw more of the island's quiet details. Shoes left outside doors, hammocks swaying gently, chickens scratching beneath trees. Everything moved, but nothing hurried. The heat softened as the shadows stretched. He followed the same narrow path back, guided only by memory. As he neared the forest's edge, the trees opened again, and the aircraft came into view, still resting quietly under the tarp. Clara was sitting on the ground, legs crossed, with the satellite phone beside her. She looked up as he approached. "Any luck?" he asked. She shook her head. Toma tried the radio. Faint static. "Might be clearer tonight." Keanu nodded. "It can wait." She studied him for a second. "You seem different." He smiled softly. "I walk through a world that doesn't need fixing." She didn't ask what he meant. She just nodded and leaned back against the tree. Jordan stirred from his sleep, blinking slowly as the light shifted. He sat up and rubbed his face. "Did I miss anything?" Keanu looked at him. "Only everything." Jordan gave him a puzzled grin. "Did you meet anyone out there?" "I met time," Keanu said, "and it wasn't wearing a watch." Toma appeared from behind the shed, wiping grease from his hands. "Engine's cooling now. I'll take another look at sunset. You've got a strong bird. She just got tired." Keanu looked at the plane, then back at Toma. "You ever think about leaving this island?" he asked. Toma shrugged. "Sometimes. But I figure, if I left, who would fix the runway for the next tired bird?" Keanu nodded. That answer, simple and sincere, stayed with him. The sky was changing again. Gold bleeding into orange. Keanu sat beside Clara and watched the horizon, letting the silence speak. He didn't know how long the delay would last. He didn't care. Some stories aren't meant to be rushed, some chapters arrive unplanned. And some islands don't need clocks. They only need people who are willing to listen. As the light began to fade, Toma led Keanu to a quiet spot just beyond the strip where a great banyan tree rose from the earth like something ancient. Its roots stretched wide, like arms wrapped around the earth, and its canopy created a natural shelter from the sinking sun. They sat on a pair of smooth stones beneath the tree. Toma handed Keanu a peeled mango wrapped in a piece of cloth. The fruit was warm and sweet, and Keanu accepted it with a quiet thank you. For a while, they said nothing. The air was thick with golden light, birdsong, and the faint rumble of the ocean somewhere out of sight. Toma finally broke the silence. "You ever get tired of people watching you?" Keanu looked at him, caught off guard. "What makes you ask?" Toma shrugged, peeling his own mango slowly. "You seem used to being noticed, but you also seem relieved not to be." Keanu took a bite of fruit, chewed slowly, swallowed. "I think I've always felt two things at once, grateful for the attention and a little lost in it." Toma nodded, thoughtful. "That makes sense." He leaned back against a root and looked up through the canopy. "I used to want to be an engineer," he said. "Big cities, blueprints, steel towers. I had posters of bridges on my wall when I was a kid." Keanu tilted his head. "So what changed?" "My father got sick," Toma replied. "He ran the generator and the water system. When he couldn't anymore, I took over. Just for a while, I told myself. But then, he didn't get better." Keanu's voice was soft. "You stayed." Toma nodded. "At first, I thought I was giving something up, but then I realized I wasn't building towers. I was keeping this place alive. I was fixing what mattered. Keanu let the words settle in. He looked out at the path where he had walked earlier. The children, the woman with the fruit, the bridge over the stream. A place where people existed without needing to be seen. Toma glanced sideways at him. "Can I ask you something?" Keanu nodded. "If the cameras never came back, would you still tell stories?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Keanu didn't answer right away. He stared at the fruit in his hand, then at the tree, then back at Toma. "I've never been asked that before," he said. Toma didn't push. He just waited. Keanu took a breath. "I don't know," he said. "I think I started because stories helped me survive. They gave me a place to be someone else, someone braver. But somewhere along the way, I started needing the audience too." Toma nodded slowly, saying nothing more. The question hung there, unfinished. "True?" Keanu set the mango peel down gently on the cloth beside him. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the patch of earth between his boots. The silence between him and Toma wasn't awkward. It had weight. Like the kind of silence that only shows up when someone finally says something that matters. Toma reached over and offered him a piece of cloth to wipe his hands. Keanu took it with a grateful nod. "When you said you fix what matters," Keanu began, "what did you mean?" Toma looked up at the thick branches above. "I mean, this island lives on little things. A working pipe, a signal light, a safe runway. If I do my part right, no one notices. The best days are the ones where everything works and nobody says, 'Thank you.' That doesn't bother you?" Toma shook his head. "Not anymore. When I was younger, sure. I wanted applause, recognition. But now, I just want to sleep well. And I do." Keanu studied him. There was no bitterness in his voice, no longing. Just clarity. "I used to think I had to keep climbing," Keanu said. "Every role, every award, every year, like if I stopped, I'd disappear." Toma smiled slightly. "You don't strike me as someone who could disappear. Maybe not to the world, but to myself, yeah. It's easy to get lost when everything about you is projected on a screen. You start to believe the version they like best." Toma nodded slowly. "That's true, even when no one's watching. You can still lose track of who you are." Keanu looked over. "Did you ever regret not becoming an engineer?" Toma was quiet a long time before answering. "Sometimes I wonder what buildings I would have made. But then I think about the people who've landed here. Planes on fire, medics rushing to carry someone out, lost travelers who had nowhere else to go. And I remember, I built something. I built safety. I built trust." Keanu breathed in deeply. "You built home." Toma nodded. "That's better than a bridge." The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of the ocean again. Somewhere nearby, a gecko chirped. The sky above the banyan tree glowed soft orange, fading into lavender at the edges. "I don't know what I'd be without the stories," Keanu said at last. "But maybe that's the point. Maybe I'm not supposed to know right now." Toma looked at him gently. "Maybe not knowing is the beginning of something new." Keanu let the thought rest. There, under the tree, without an audience, without a role, without a reason to pretend, he felt more seen than he had in years. And not for what he was known for, but for what he had nearly forgotten. They sat in silence again, listening to the tree creak above them and the island exhale around them. Toma eventually stood and brushed his palms together. "I should check the generator before the sun goes. Nights when the island talks loudest. Power has to be steady." Keanu rose with him. "Want help?" Toma gave a nod. "Sure. I won't say no to another set of hands." They walked back toward the airstrip together, following the worn path between the banyan roots. The light was thinner now, shadows stretching long across the ground. Fireflies began to appear, blinking gently in the underbrush like tiny lanterns. As they reached the edge of the shed, the hum of the generator greeted them. Toma stepped inside and flicked a switch. A string of small lights buzzed to life overhead. Keanu leaned against the doorframe, watching. "You know," Toma said, tightening a bolt along the panel, "when my father died, he left me a note. Just a few lines. It said, 'You don't have to build the tallest thing. Just something that doesn't fall when it rains.'" Keanu smiled. "That sounds like someone who understood the long game." Toma nodded. "He didn't finish school, never left the island, but he understood people and weather." The generator sputtered once, then steadied. Toma closed the panel and turned to Keanu. "You'd probably get asked 100 deep questions by journalists, huh?" Keanu laughed softly. "They try, but they usually don't listen to the answers." Toma raised an eyebrow. "Then why answer?" Keanu paused. "Because someone might." They stepped outside as the last rim of sunlight disappeared. The sky above them glowed a dusky purple. The moon was rising over the palms. Toma gestured to a log bench. They sat again. "Back when I was a kid," Keanu said, "I used to build things. Junk robots, cardboard sets. I'd tell stories to my sister and act them out in the garage." "What happened to that kid?" "Elm grew up," Keanu said, "and started chasing bigger things. I guess he thought that was the only way to be taken seriously." Toma reached down, picked up a stick, and drew a circle in the dirt. "Funny thing about kids," he said. "They know who they are until someone tells them to be something else." Keanu looked down at the circle. "Maybe that's why I keep telling stories," he said, "to try and find that version of me again." Toma smiled. "Then maybe the cameras don't matter as much as you think." Keanu didn't respond right away. He just sat there, beneath the moon, beside a man who asked better questions than anyone in Hollywood. He realized, sometimes you have to land in the wrong place to remember where you started. The moon was higher now, resting just above the treetops like a silent observer. The heat of the day had softened into a warm breeze that rustled the palms and carried the scent of salt and damp soil. Keanu sat beside Toma on the bench just outside the maintenance shed, their earlier conversation still lingering in the quiet space between them. Without saying much, Toma stood and disappeared into the small structure. A few moments later, he returned carrying a weathered acoustic guitar, its wood faded and scratched, its neck darkened with years of use. One of the strings was missing, and another was tied at the end with a crude knot. Keanu looked at it with gentle curiosity. "She's seen better days," Toma said, lowering himself onto the bench again. "But she still sings." He rested the instrument on his lap and began tuning it slowly, twisting the pegs with practiced fingers. The sound was uneven at first, but it settled into something raw and honest. "My father used to play this," he said, "only at night. Said music wasn't for noise, it was for remembering." Keanu watched in silence. Toma began strumming a slow, steady rhythm, nothing flashy, just a sequence of chords that felt like footsteps in the sand. Then he started to sing. The lyrics were in his native language, soft and flowing, with long vowels that blended into each other like the tide. The melody was simple, but it clung to the air with a kind of quiet urgency. Keanu didn't understand the words, but the story was clear in the way Toma played, in the breaks between lines, in the way his voice lowered during the verses and rose in the final refrain. It was about a fisherman who sailed out farther than anyone else. He wanted to bring back more than fish. He wanted riches, reputation, something greater than what his village offered. So he sailed for days, chasing the edge of the sea, chasing stories he'd only heard in dreams. But in chasing that dream, he lost the stars. He lost the sound of the shore. And when he finally turned back, he couldn't remember which way led home. The last lines were spoken more than sung, a kind of whisper, a prayer, a question with no answer. Toma let the final chord fade into silence. He didn't look at Keanu right away, just stared at the strings, his hand still resting lightly on the wood. "That was my father's song," he said finally. He wrote it during the year he thought he'd die. Keanu's voice was quiet. It's beautiful. Toma gave a faint smile. It's true. The moonlight reflected off the guitar's surface, and for a moment, it looked new again. Keanu leaned back on the bench, staring out toward the jungle where the sounds of the night had taken over. Soft chirps, the low buzz of insects, and the occasional rustle of something unseen in the brush. But it was the silence between those sounds that struck him. A silence that held no tension, just stillness. Toma handed him the guitar without a word. Keanu hesitated. It had been years since he'd touched one. He used to play in his 20s, mostly in the privacy of his apartment. Back when music was something that soothed him after long days of press or grief he couldn't name. He'd never played for crowds, not seriously, but he remembered the feeling of letting notes carry emotion when words couldn't. He held the guitar gently and strummed the open strings. It buzzed imperfectly, but the sound was familiar. I used to play a little, he admitted. Toma nodded. Then play a little. Keanu thought for a moment, then began picking out a simple pattern, a loop he remembered from years ago. It didn't belong to any song. It was just something he'd made up one night after visiting his mother's house for the first time in a decade. He let it repeat, his fingers finding the rhythm again, even with the missing string. He didn't speak, he just played. Toma closed his eyes and listened. And Keanu thought about his sister Kim, the hospital visits, the late nights when she couldn't sleep, and asked him to read poetry just to hear a voice in the dark. He remembered their childhood. How she'd made him laugh even when they had nothing, even when they moved every few months. He thought of her strength, her refusal to be pitied. He thought of his mother, working 2 jobs, smiling through pain, teaching him that kindness didn't cost anything, that doing things for others wasn't weakness, but the highest form of strength. And he thought of himself, the boy who had stood on a high school stage pretending to be Hamlet, trembling but exhilarated, the young man who'd sat in parking lots after auditions wondering if he was enough, the actor who became a star but never quite believed the light was meant to stay on him for too long. The music slowed. He stopped playing. Toma opened his eyes. You still carry them, Toma said quietly. Keanu nodded. They never really leave. Toma looked at the guitar. Then maybe that's why the stories still come. Not for the cameras, but for them. Keanu didn't answer. He didn't need to. He handed the guitar back and sat with the stillness. And in that moment, the quiet said more than any applause ever could. Toma rested the guitar beside the bench and leaned back, his arms crossed loosely over his chest. The moonlight made shadows of the trees stretch long across the dirt. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then fell quiet again. That song, Keanu said after a while, it reminded me of something I've never said out loud. Toma looked over. What's that? The fame. It's like the fisherman's horizon. You keep chasing it, thinking there's something just beyond the next wave, but if you're not careful, you lose track of why you left the shore in the first place. Toma didn't speak. He waited. Keanu took a breath. After my sister got sick, I kept working. I told myself it was for her, that the money, the roles, the grind would make her proud. But somewhere in the middle of all that, I stopped sitting beside her. I was always flying, always filming, and when she needed me most, I was halfway around the world on a soundstage pretending to be a man with nothing to lose. Toma's voice was quiet. But you came back. I did, but I missed time I'll never get back. I'd give every award, every role, every paycheck, just to buy her one more year. Toma looked down. You don't need to give those things up. Just don't forget who they're for. Keanu nodded slowly. Toma stood and picked up the guitar again. He didn't play, just held it with both hands, fingers resting lightly on the frets. My father used to say, play even when no one's listening, especially then. Keanu looked at him. What did he mean? Because that's when the song is most honest, when it's just for you, or for the people you love. Not for an audience, not for applause. Keanu folded his hands in his lap. Do you ever wish more people had heard his music? Toma smiled faintly. Sometimes, but when he died, the whole village came, not because he was famous, but because when they were hurting, he showed up. That's the song they remember. Keanu's throat tightened. The lights above the shed flickered once, then steadied. A moth circled the bulb. Thank you, Keanu said. Voice low. Toma glanced sideways. For what? For not asking anything of me. Toma shrugged. You already gave something. They sat for a few minutes longer before Toma gently placed the guitar back inside the shed. Keanu stood and stretched, the muscles in his back sore from sitting so still. As they prepared to part for the night, Toma looked up at the sky. Tomorrow, maybe the part for your plane will come, or maybe not. Keanu looked up too. The stars blinked like old friends. Either way, he said, I think I needed to land here. Toma smiled. Then the island did its job, and with that, they returned to silence, each man holding a different chord of the same unfinished song. The shed turned tornillo glowed dimly with the soft yellow light of two hanging bulbs strung along the rafters. The night had wrapped the island in a calm stillness. Keanu stepped through the open door and found Clara seated at the narrow table inside, the satellite phone resting beside her. She looked up as he entered, her face carrying the tired patience of someone used to long delays and unplanned reroute. You're just in time, she said, gesturing toward the phone. We finally got through. Keanu raised an eyebrow. And? They've been trying to reach us all day. Your speech was supposed to be in 3 hours. There's a flurry of backup plans in motion. Tokyo's still willing to reschedule for tomorrow if we can get airborne by early morning. He walked over and picked up the satellite phone. The screen displayed a blinking cursor inside a message window, already drafted. Clara had typed in the contact and location coordinates, along with a brief note requesting a redirect and alternate transport. Jordan's cleaning up out back, Clara added. Toma says they might be able to run a system test in the morning, but parts from Guam haven't left yet. Earliest we can expect them is tomorrow evening. You won't make the summit. Keanu stared at the message draft for a long moment. The phone felt heavier than it should have, like the weight of it wasn't just plastic and signal, but expectation. He moved his thumb over the keypad, hovered, and then lowered the device. I walked through the village today, he said quietly. Clara didn't answer, just waited. I saw kids playing with driftwood, he continued. No toys, just imagination. An old woman gave me mango with her hands. No brand logos, no noise, just kindness. Clara leaned back in her chair. I figured something shifted. You came back looking lighter. Keanu looked at the phone again. He clicked into the message field. His fingers hovered, typing a few words. Change of plans. Unable to attend. Personal delay. He read it once. Then he deleted it. Word by word, line by line. When the field was blank, he pressed the power button and set the phone gently on the table. I think I'm supposed to be here, he said. I think this whole delay, it's not a problem to solve. It's a moment to understand. Clara nodded slowly. So what do you want me to do? Keanu walked over to the window where the curtain was half drawn. Outside, the wing of the jet glowed faintly under the moonlight. Nothing, he said. No calls, no updates. He turned back to her. Maybe this isn't an interruption. Clara tilted her head. Then what is it? Keanu gave the smallest of smiles. Maybe this is the story. Clara sat in silence, then leaned forward and slowly turned off the satellite phone. Outside, footsteps approached. Jordan entered, brushing dirt from his hands. Did I miss something? He asked. Clara looked at Keanu, then back at Jordan. Yeah, she said softly. Something important. Jordan set down a folded tarp near the door and glanced between them. "What happened?" he asked again. Keanu pulled out one of the chairs and motioned for Jordan to sit. The air in the shed was warm, filled with the faint hum of the generator still running somewhere beyond the trees. "I was supposed to give a speech in Tokyo," Keanu said, "about legacy, about storytelling." Jordan nodded. "Yeah, I read the schedule. That was the big one." Keanu tapped the table with his fingers, slow and rhythmic. "I had a lot prepared. Notes, personal memories, quotes from old scripts, all meant to inspire." Jordan leaned in, waiting. "But after today," Keanu said, "I realized something. I've been giving speeches for years, saying the right things at the right time. But I don't think I've let myself live the quiet parts of the story." Clara leaned her elbows on the table. "The parts no one sees." Keanu looked at Jordan. "You asked me yesterday why I invited you on this trip." Jordan straightened in his seat. "I brought you because you remind me of a time when I still had questions. You weren't trying to prove anything, you were just trying to understand." Jordan looked unsure how to respond. "I still don't really understand why I'm here." Keanu gave a faint smile. "Neither do I, but maybe that's the point." Clara crossed her arms. "You're really not going to send the message?" Keanu shook his head. "I think this island has given me something I didn't even know I needed. Silence. Stillness. A different kind of audience." Clara looked thoughtful. "You mean Toma?" "I mean everyone," Keanu said. "The children, the teacher, the old woman on her porch, none of them cared who I was. They just saw me. And that's rare." The room went quiet. Outside, a breeze stirred the trees. The island had gone dark except for the faint glow of the shed's lights and the outline of the grounded jet. Jordan glanced at the satellite phone. "They're probably panicking in Tokyo." Keanu nodded. "Let them." Jordan looked at him with new eyes. "You're not who I expected you to be." Keanu met his gaze. "Neither am I." Clara stood and stretched her back. "I'll let Toma know we're grounded for another day. He'll probably offer us fresh fruit and a story in exchange." Keanu smiled. "Sounds like a good trade." She stepped outside into the night, the door creaking behind her. Jordan stayed seated, studying Keanu. He didn't speak right away. Finally, he asked, "If this is the story, what's the ending?" Keanu didn't answer at first. He reached for the satellite phone, turned it face down and pushed it gently to the side. "There isn't one," he said. "Not yet." And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the need to write it in advance. He was content to let it unfold, word by word, moment by moment, on an island where nothing arrived early and nothing ever felt late. The next morning arrived without fanfare. No alarms, no urgent knocks, just the slow brightening of sky and the gentle return of birdsong. Keanu stepped outside the shed, barefoot on the packed earth, and took a deep breath. The air was cooler than the day before, soft with dew and filled with the smell of hibiscus and ocean breeze. Toma was already awake, crouched beside the generator, adjusting a few cables. "Sleep all right?" he asked without looking up. "Best I've had in months," Keanu replied. Toma tightened a bolt and stood, wiping his hands. "Come with me. There's something I want to show you." They walked past the runway, through a grove of coconut trees, and into the narrow village path that Keanu had taken the day before. The homes were quiet, a few open windows, some pots already heating over small fires. Chickens darted between roots. A baby cried somewhere in the distance, and a woman's voice sang softly in reply. They turned down a narrow trail lined with stones. At the end of the path sat a small structure with walls made of bamboo and tin. A single doorway stood open, revealing the interior. No desks, no fans, no lights. Just a chalkboard nailed to the wall and a woven mat spread across the floor. The school. Inside, maybe a dozen children sat cross-legged, their eyes focused on the woman at the front. who held a stick of chalk and was carefully drawing letters on the board. A single candle flickered beside her, its light small but determined. Toma paused in the doorway and motioned for Keanu to watch. "Tobias come every morning," he said. "Even when it rains, even when there's nothing to eat at home, they sit here and learn." Keanu watched the children lean forward as the woman drew a simple picture beneath the letters: a house, a bird, a tree. Then she pointed to the tree, and one of the children stood and spelled out the word slowly. Toma whispered, "We don't have books for everyone, so they take turns reading one aloud. They memorize most of it." Keanu stepped just outside the doorway, not wanting to interrupt. The teacher noticed him and nodded once, a smile touching her lips before she returned to her lesson. The children never looked away from her, not even when the chalk snapped in her hand and she had to switch to a smaller piece. They stayed rooted in the moment, eyes wide with curiosity. Outside, beside the school's wall, a little boy sat in the dirt with a stick. He was drawing shapes in the sand. Keanu crouched beside him quietly. The boy didn't look up. He continued his drawing, an odd rectangular box with a circle on one end, a narrow handle on the other. Keanu studied it. "A camera?" he asked softly. The boy looked up, surprised but smiling, and nodded. "They've never seen one," Toma said behind him, "but they dream anyway." Keanu stayed crouched beside the boy for a moment longer, watching as he carefully etched a tripod beneath the camera. The child then added stick figures in front of it, one with a wide smile, the other with their hands raised like they were flying. "What's this one?" Keanu asked, pointing to the figure in motion. The boy whispered something in his native language, and Toma translated. "Says it's a hero, the kind that saves people without hurting anyone." Keanu smiled. "That's a good kind of hero." The boy grinned, then returned to his drawing. Toma stepped forward, offering Keanu a seat on a low wooden bench near the wall. They both sat, watching the classroom continue. "I used to think legacy was something large," Keanu said after a moment. "A building with your name on it, a trophy in a glass case. But I'm starting to think maybe it's this. One teacher, one kid, one candle." Toma nodded slowly. "You don't have to be remembered by many to change the life of one." Keanu looked at the wall behind the chalkboard. There were handprints painted in different colors, small, uneven, made with fingers dipped in natural dyes. Above them, in careful lettering, was a phrase written in English: "We learn so we can return light to the world." He read it twice. "Who wrote that?" "The kids did," Toma said. "They chose it last year, after we asked what school meant to them." Keanu felt something stir in his chest, something deep and quiet, like a door he hadn't opened in a long time. "When my sister was sick," he said slowly, "I asked her once if she was afraid. She said no. She said, 'I'm just sad I won't get to see what comes next.'" Toma looked at him gently. "I think she would have loved this place," Keanu said. "It's full of what comes next." They sat in silence for a few moments, the children's voices rising and falling in the background as they repeated the teacher's words. "I've made a lot of movies," Keanu said. "Some will be forgotten, a few might last. But I've never built a school." Toma didn't respond right away. Then he said, "You just did." Keanu turned to him. "Every time you show up somewhere, every time you tell the truth, every time you sit beside someone and ask nothing in return, you build something. They remember, even if they don't know your name." Keanu looked back at the little boy in the dirt, still drawing. "What we leave behind," he said quietly, "isn't what we planned. It's what others carry forward." Toma nodded. And just then, the teacher handed the chalk to a young girl. She stepped up and began writing carefully, slow, uncertain strokes, forming letters one by one. "You." The children clapped gently, and Keanu Reeves, without a camera or a crowd, without a script or a stage, smiled with a quiet kind of awe. He hadn't planned to land here. But maybe this was always the place. He was meant to leave something behind. As the sun sank low over the western edge of the island, golden light painted the treetops in amber. Smoke curled gently from the fire pit near the center of the village, where logs had been arranged in a circle and a wide grill had been placed over glowing coals. Toma waved Keanu over as he arrived with Clara and Jordan. "Dinner's almost ready," Toma said, handing Clara a carved wooden cup filled with a sweet drink made from fruit and coconut milk. Keanu took in the scene. Families gathered around the fire, some sitting on woven mats, others on upturned crates or old wooden benches. There were no chairs, no tables set with silverware, just closeness, just presence. Children ran barefoot through the clearing, chasing each other with laughter so free it felt like music. A group of elders huddled at one end of the pit, humming a low melody while slicing bananas and breadfruit. The scent of grilled fish and roasted taro root filled the air. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, breathing it in. Jordan looked around with a mix of surprise and admiration. "This feels like something out of a dream." Toma smiled. "It's just Thursday night." As they settled onto a mat near the fire, one of the elders approached with a wooden bowl filled with fire-grilled parrotfish, each wrapped in banana leaves. She handed it to Keanu with a warm nod, then moved on. Keanu unwrapped the leaf and took a bite. The fish was tender, slightly smoky, seasoned with lime and something earthy he couldn't quite place. "This might be the best meal I've had in a decade," he said. Toma, sitting beside him with a grin, said, "We don't have fancy restaurants, but the ocean provides if you listen." The music grew louder as a pair of men began tapping rhythms on hollowed logs. Two women began to sing. Their voices rose and fell like waves. Melancholy, steady, timeless. Then came the children. About a dozen of them formed a semicircle in front of the fire. Each wore a crown of palm leaves and simple costumes woven from coconut fronds. One stepped forward, speaking in a loud, proud voice in a mix of native language and broken English. "This is our play. It is called The Sky That Fell." Clara leaned in. "Did they rehearse this?" Toma chuckled. "They wrote it this morning after they met you." Keanu blinked, stunned. The children began to perform. One child lay on the ground, arms outstretched, pretending to sleep. Another walked in a circle around them, narrating a story of a world where the sky was once close to the earth and people could touch the stars. But then people forgot to say thank you, and the sky rose higher and higher until it became lonely. Jordan whispered, "This is incredible." Palm leaves became wings. Driftwood became boats. The children played each part with seriousness and joy. There were no stage lights, no microphones, no curtains. Just imagination. As the play continued, the villagers clapped gently between scenes. The story unfolded with surprising depth. How a child, born during a quiet season, noticed the sky weeping stars. How that child learned to listen, not with ears but with heart. And how, through kindness and small acts, they coaxed the sky to smile again. One of the children turned to face Keanu near the end of the play. She pointed up at the sky and said in a clear voice, "Sometimes the stars fall to remind us to look up again." The performance ended with all the children raising their hands toward the sky, standing in perfect stillness. Then, slowly, they lowered them and bowed together. The crowd erupted in applause, not loud but deeply felt. Keanu clapped with his hands pressed firmly together, his eyes shining with quiet emotion. Clara leaned over, whispering, "I think they just told your life story without knowing it." Keanu gave a soft laugh and nodded. "I think they told everyone's." The fire crackled louder now. Sparks rose into the night air like scattered memories. The elders resumed their singing, a new song. Slower, lower, but filled with warmth. It didn't ask for attention. It just existed, honest and unhurried. Jordan sat beside Keanu, unusually quiet. He looked over and said, You've walked red carpets on every continent, but I've never seen you like this." Keanu turned to him. "Like what? Like someone who doesn't want to leave?" Keanu stared at the fire for a long time before answering. "You don't need a red carpet," he said softly, "to feel something real." He reached for the cup of fruit drink beside him, raised it gently toward the children, and nodded. They beamed, their hands still clutching palm leaves and shells. Toma joined them again, offering a plate of sliced papaya and roasted yam. He sat down beside Keanu, his eyes gleaming. "You understand now," he said. Keanu nodded. "I think I do." The night deepened. A breeze rolled in from the sea, stirring the leaves above. The fire glowed low and steady. Around them, no one pulled out a phone. No one checked the time. There was only the sound of crackling wood, laughter, and music drifting across the sand. Keanu leaned back on his hands, eyes tracing the stars that shimmered overhead. "Do they do this often?" he asked. Toma smiled. "Every chance we get." "And what's the occasion tonight?" Toma looked around. "You. Them. Life." Keanu let that settle in. His life had been full of invitations that came in thick envelopes and arrived with instructions. But this one, on a remote island with no name on any map he'd studied, was the only invitation that had asked nothing of him and given so much. As the night wore on, a child curled up beside her mother. Another dozed off on a mat. The music grew quieter. Keanu watched it all, memorizing the silence between the notes. No cameras, no audience, just truth. And that, he thought, might be the most unforgettable premiere of his life. The fire had long since turned to glowing embers, and most of the village had drifted to sleep. The stars above were sharp and countless, flung across the sky like dust from a shattered dream. Keanu sat on a fallen log near the edge of the trees, letting the night wrap around him like a shawl. Toma approached quietly, a torch in hand. "Can't sleep?" he asked. Keanu shook his head. "Didn't want to. Some nights feel too rare to waste." Toma chuckled, settling down beside him. They sat together for a while in silence, listening to the soft calls of geckos and the distant lap of waves against the reef. Then Keanu turned slightly. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What do you want most in the world?" Toma didn't even pause. "For this airstrip to stay open." Keanu blinked. "That's it?" Toma nodded slowly. "Not for me, for whoever needs to land next." Keanu looked at him, genuinely surprised. "That's a beautiful answer." Toma stared out toward the runway. It was barely visible in the moonlight, just a dark stretch of packed earth between trees and sea. "This island is small," Toma said. "Most people don't even know it's here. Planes don't land often, maybe twice a year, but when they do, it's never a mistake. It's always someone lost, someone running, someone trying to get somewhere else and realizing they've landed where they need to be." Keanu was quiet, letting the words settle. Bill continued. "If I can keep this place open, even just a little longer, then the next person has somewhere to come down, somewhere to breathe, somewhere to remember who they are." Keanu stared at the fire pit, its last coal flickering. "And that's enough for you?" Toma smiled, not with pride, but with peace. "It's more than enough. I've had dreams before, big ones. I let some go, others changed shape. But this stayed. This mattered." Keanu exhaled slowly. "Most people chase things they'll never touch. You're protecting something invisible, and somehow, it feels more solid than any building I've ever seen." Toma stood, brushing the sand from his palms. "Legacy isn't what you take with you. It's what stays when you're gone." He walked back toward the village, leaving Keanu alone with the dark sky and his own thoughts. The wind shifted. A soft breeze rolled in, cool against his skin. Keanu reached into his pack and pulled out the small leather journal he always carried. Its pages were filled with fragments, thoughts from sets, lines from strangers, grief, love, questions he never answered. He opened to a blank page and began to write. Slowly, carefully. "Dear stranger," he wrote, "if you've landed here, it's not by accident. Dear stranger, if you've landed here, it's not by accident. The sky didn't break, the engine didn't fail. You were meant to fall out of your orbit, meant to touch down where no map had ever pointed. I know, because I did, and it changed everything." Keanu paused, staring at the page. The words came easily, flowing like the stars above. "You'll notice there's no signal here, no noise, no advertisements, no stage, no spotlight, just the wind in the trees, the smell of the sea, the kindness of strangers with no reason to be kind. And you'll wonder, like I did, if maybe this was what the world used to be before we complicated it." He glanced toward the fire pit, still glowing faintly. "If you're scared, let the sky be scared with you. If you're tired, sleep near the banyan tree. If you're broken, speak to the children. They'll remind you what it's like to dream without doubt." Keanu felt the weight of his years as he wrote, not in a painful way, but in the sense of presence. Every wound, every joy, every loss had shaped this moment. "I thought I came here to speak at an event, but I found myself instead, not the version in photographs, not the one in film, just a man walking barefoot beside a mechanic who builds with love and believes every broken thing still has a place." He smiled as he thought of Toma, of the boy drawing a camera in the dirt, of the girl who had written his name on the board without knowing why it mattered. The legacy isn't a statue or a star on a sidewalk. It's a meal shared over a fire. It's a runway that stays clear for whoever lands next. It's this page. And it's you. So if you're reading this, take a breath. You've arrived, even if just for a while. You are home. Keanu closed the journal and placed it carefully back into his pack. Then he looked up at the stars. 1,000 tiny suns shining in silence, offering no answers, only light. Behind him, a soft rustle. He turned and saw Jordan approaching, hair tousled from sleep, rubbing his eyes. "Can't sleep either?" Keanu asked. Jordan shook his head. "Too much in my head." Keanu patted the log beside him. Jordan sat down, glancing at the journal still tucked under Keanu. "Are you writing something?" "A letter. To someone I haven't met yet." Jordan tilted his head, curious. "Sometimes we write for others so we can finally hear ourselves," Keanu said. Jordan nodded. "You think we'll ever come back here?" Keanu looked toward the runway, then toward the glowing edge of the village. "I think some part of us never left." They sat in silence as the sky began to shift. The stars softened. The black gave way to a faint blue whisper on the horizon. Morning was coming, but something else had already arrived. A quiet kind of knowing. A peace that wasn't loud, but certain. Keanu stood and stretched. "Come on," he said. "Let's see what today has to teach us." And as they walked toward the rising sun, the airstrip behind them waited empty, ready, and full of quiet purpose. The morning air buzzed with quiet energy. Down by the strip, Captain Eli and 2 local men worked side by side, tightening bolts and checking instruments under the wing. Toma stood near the nose of the jet, his arms crossed, gaze steady. He had been up since before dawn, making sure every detail was right. Keanu stood back, watching them all in motion, feeling the weight of time pressing in. Clara approached from the makeshift hut where they'd slept the past 2 nights. She carried her bag and the satellite phone, which was now charged and working. She gave a small nod to Keanu. "They say we're ready." Jordan walked up beside her, holding a carved wooden toy in his hand. One of the children had given it to him that morning. It was a small airplane, rough around the edges but full of care. Keanu adjusted the strap on his shoulder and turned to face the runway. The villagers had begun to gather quietly at the edge of the forest, forming a loose semicircle near the end of the strip. Some carried baskets of fruit, Others simply stood with hands folded, watching. Toma stepped forward and extended his hand. Keanu took it, holding tight. "You helped more than you know," Keanu said. Toma smiled gently. "I didn't fix the plane. I just kept the runway clear." Keanu didn't answer. His throat felt tight. Toma added, "I hope the next person who lands here finds what they need too." Keanu nodded. "They will, because you'll still be here." Toma looked away, just for a second. Maybe. Or maybe they'll find someone else. That's the way of this island. What it gives isn't tied to who's here. It's just, always ready? Jordan stepped forward and handed Toma the toy airplane. "I think this belongs here." Toma took it in both hands, surprised. "Thank you." Jordan smiled. "I think this place changed me. I don't want to forget it." Toma touched the boy's shoulder. "You won't." Clara gave Toma a small bow, the respectful kind she'd learned from years in Asia. "Thank you for everything." Toma returned the gesture. "You were meant to land here, all of you." The engines of the jet whirred softly in the background, warming up for takeoff. The noise felt distant, almost out of place. Keanu turned to take one last look at the village. The children waved. One of them held up a sign they'd painted hastily that morning, using crushed berries and charcoal. It simply said, "See you again." He smiled. Not goodbye, just again. He stepped up the stairs into the plane, followed by Clara and Jordan. Inside, the cabin felt strangely sterile. Cold, clean, precise, but familiar. Captain Eli gave a thumbs up from the cockpit. "We're all set, conditions are clear." Keanu buckled in. Clara took the seat beside him, Jordan across the aisle. The wheels began to roll. As the plane picked up speed, Keanu turned to the window. The crowd at the edge of the trees grew smaller. Toma raised a hand. The others followed. And just as the plane lifted off, Keanu saw the runway vanish beneath the treetops. But something in him didn't rise. Something stayed grounded, anchored. Something unfinished. The jet climbed steadily, slicing through layers of mist as the island disappeared below. From his window seat, Keanu pressed his forehead lightly against the cool glass. He searched for a final glimpse of Fongale, but the blue of the ocean had already swallowed it whole. Clara glanced at him. "You all right?" Keanu gave a faint nod. "Just thinking." Jordan looked up from across the aisle. "I thought I'd be excited to be back in the air again, but I already missed the sound of waves." Keanu smiled gently. That island had a way of making everything else feel distant. The cabin was quiet. No movie played, no music hummed from speakers. For once, silence was allowed to sit between them. Keanu opened his journal again, flipping past the letter he had written under the stars. He added a line beneath it. "And still, something follows me. A question. A door left slightly open." He closed the book softly. The jet moved forward, but part of his mind still lingered on the edge of that airstrip, with Toma's words echoing like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. "I hope the next person who lands here finds what they need too." That line played again in his mind, quiet and persistent. He thought of all the places he'd flown to over the years, premieres, awards, photo shoots, even charity work. But how many had truly given him something? Not many, and none like that. He glanced at Clara. "Do you believe in assigned places? Not by fate, but by need. Like, you don't end up somewhere just by mistake. You end up where someone like you is supposed to learn something." Clara considered it. "I think sometimes the detours are the only real destinations." Jordan nodded. "I feel like I know myself better now than I did before the turbulence." Keanu let out a short breath. "Yeah, funny how it took a broken engine to fix a few things inside me." Captain Eli's voice came over the intercom. "Good afternoon, folks. We've leveled out at cruising altitude. Next scheduled stop, Tokyo. Should be clear skies the rest of the way." Clear skies. It sounded right, but also strange. Keanu looked back out the window. There was nothing but clouds now, no sign of the island, no proof that any of it had happened, except the weight it left in his chest. He leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes, but he didn't rest. He listened to the quiet hum of the engine, to the silence inside himself, to the feeling that not everything in life was meant to be wrapped up neatly. Some stories, he realized, aren't meant to be finished, just passed on. And in that moment, he understood something he hadn't put into words yet. He would return. Maybe not in a week, or even a year, but someday, when another detour came, when the path twisted again, he would go back. Because Fongole wasn't done with him, and somewhere beneath the clouds, an island still waited, still listened, still held space for the next weary traveler to touch down and remember how to begin again. The plane touched down at Haneda Airport just after dusk. The city of Tokyo, alive and blazing with lights, stretched endlessly beyond the tarmac. Neon signs blinked across buildings. A river of traffic pulsed across overpasses. The moment the wheels hit the ground, Keanu felt it. The noise had returned. Not just the literal kind, the other kind. The constant pull of everything at once. Schedules, appearances, expectations, identity. It pressed against his chest like a heavy coat he hadn't realized he'd taken off on the island. As the jet taxied toward the private terminal, Keanu sat still, eyes on the city's skyline. Jordan and Clara began to gather their things, speaking in hushed voices. No one was rushing, but something in the air had shifted. The quiet clarity of the island was already retreating behind them. Outside, a car was waiting, a black SUV, engine humming, driver in a suit. Nearby, a handful of media vans had already lined up behind a rope barrier. Photographers with long lenses paced like restless birds. Security kept them back, but the flash of cameras began even before the door opened. Clara reached over and touched Keanu's arm gently. "We're back." He nodded slowly. "Yeah." He stepped out first. The moment his feet hit the tarmac, the flashes exploded. A wall of light, voices, and questions surged forward. "Keanu, how was the flight? Are you ready for tonight's speech? Did you really make an emergency landing? What are you wearing?" He kept walking, eyes soft, shoulders steady. A journalist shouted from behind the barricade, "We heard you were stranded on an island. Is that true?" Keanu paused for half a second, then gave a small smile. "Yes," he said, "and I'm grateful for it." He got into the SUV. The door shut. The noise vanished. Inside the car, silence returned, but it wasn't the same. The kind of silence that lives in the middle of a city feels different than the one by a fire pit. Here, it felt borrowed, temporary, wrapped in concrete. Clara sat beside him, checking her phone. "We'll arrive at the hall in 25 minutes. You still want to give the keynote as planned?" Keanu didn't answer right away. He looked out the window. Billboards raced past. The news was already scrolling headlines on a massive LED screen. Somewhere, a commercial for his last film played with dubbed-over dialogue. "Yes," he finally said. "But I'm changing it." Clara looked up. "What do you mean?" He turned to her. "I was going to speak about stories, about legacy, about the arc of narrative and the magic of cinema. But now, I want to speak about something else." "What?" He glanced at her, eyes clear. "Listening." The car pulled into the underground entrance of the Tokyo International Arts Center. Dozens of staff swarmed with earpieces and clipboards, greeting them with bows and precise movements. Keanu followed them through a quiet hallway into a private green room. A mirror, bottled water, flowers. He didn't look at the mirror. He didn't practice. He sat for a while with his hands resting on his knees. Then a knock. A producer's voice. "5 minutes, Mr. Reeves." He stood, walked calmly through the backstage curtain, and waited behind the podium. The auditorium was full, nearly 2,000 people, all waiting to hear him speak. The lights dimmed. A hush settled across the crowd. Then the announcer's voice rang out, formal and clear. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome tonight's keynote speaker, Keanu Reeves. Polite applause followed. Steady, respectful. As Keanu stepped forward, his figure lit softly by a warm spotlight, a few audience members raised phones, but not many. This was a film and arts symposium, after all, the kind of crowd that listened. He reached the podium, looked out at the sea of faces, and let the silence linger just a moment longer than expected. Then he spoke. "I was going to talk to you tonight about stories," he began, voice steady but quiet. "The shape of them, the rhythm, the legacy they leave behind." He paused, hands resting gently on either side of the podium. "But I just came from a place where no one had ever seen a movie. No one there would recognize my name. There were no theaters, no red carpets, no marquees. And yet, everywhere I looked, people were telling stories." The crowd leaned in, curious, not with cameras, not with screens, with fire, with music, with food, with silence, and with listening. Keanu scanned the room, locking eyes with a few scattered individuals. See, when we talk about storytelling, we usually think about what's being said, but after what I just experienced, I think we've been asking the wrong question. He shifted slightly, his tone deepening. The real question is, can we still listen? A ripple passed through the audience. Not a sound, just a collective stillness. "I met a man on that island. He fixes a runway that barely anyone lands on. He gets no credit, no headlines. But he told me that his dream was to keep that place ready, not for himself, but for whoever might come next. And that stayed with me." Keanu smiled softly. "I didn't expect to crash land on a forgotten island, but I did. And in that silence, I remembered something I'd lost. Maybe something a lot of us have lost." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small wooden carving, a child's toy airplane, worn at the edges. "This was given to someone on my team by a boy who's never left his island. He doesn't know what a premiere is. He doesn't need to, because he already understands what most of us forget, that stories don't begin when we speak. They begin when we listen." He paused again. "I don't know what brought you here tonight. Maybe you came for inspiration, maybe for answers, maybe just for curiosity. But I want to ask you, when was the last time you truly listened to someone without a microphone, without a script, without a spotlight?" The crowd sat frozen in silence, reflective, open. Keanu closed his speech with no crescendo, no dramatic line, just a final sentence delivered quietly. "Thank you for letting me speak, and thank you, even more, for listening." He stepped back from the podium. There was no immediate applause, just a breath, a moment of space. Then, slowly, the clapping rose, not loud, but real. And Keanu, standing off to the side, knew in his heart, this story had already begun writing itself. The weeks that followed were filled with noise again. Red carpets, interviews, studio meetings. Keanu moved through it all with his usual quiet grace. But something inside him had shifted. The world hadn't changed, but he had. He didn't talk about the island, not on the late shows, not in the press junkets, not even when a magazine asked him about the rumored crash landing. He just smiled and said, "Sometimes detours are good for the soul." But when the evening settled and the obligations faded, Keanu would sit alone with his journal. He returned often to one page, the letter he had begun the night before they left Fongolay. It started with 2 words, "Dear Stranger," and below it, a single sentence that still echoed in his mind. "Thank you for the strange landing, it helped me take off again." He knew what he had to do next. It wasn't about making a statement. It wasn't about the public. It was about that runway, that man, that child with a wooden plane, and everyone who would come after. One quiet morning, before the sun had risen over the Hollywood Hills, Keanu called Clara. She was already at her desk, sipping tea. "I want to fund a tower," he said. Clara blinked. "A tower?" Or Fongolais. "A solar-powered comm tower. Emergency capable. No diesel. No dependence. Quiet. Clean." Clara sat up straighter. "You want it in your name?" "No," he said instantly. "No names, no plaques. Just build it. Quietly." Clara didn't ask why. She already knew. Within a week, she had reached out to a small but brilliant group of engineers who specialized in off-grid infrastructure. One of them had previously worked with Keanu on a clean water project in rural Vietnam. They didn't need much, just the coordinates, the specs, and a boat charter to Micronesia. Keanu provided it all. Quietly, privately. The engineers asked about press coverage, a potential film crew, a human interest angle. Keanu declined. "This isn't content," he said. "It's a thank you." They respected that. 2 weeks later, a boat carrying equipment, solar panels, and 5 workers docked near Fongolais Reef. Toma met them barefoot at the shore, just like he'd greeted Keanu. They handed him a letter. Toma read it under the same banyan tree where he and Keanu had spoken. The paper was soft, creased from travel. There was no heading, no return address, just the words, "You reminded me what stories are for. Thank you for the strange landing. It helped me take off again." There was no signature, but Toma smiled as if the writer stood beside him. He looked out toward the sky and said nothing, just nodded. Construction took 4 days. The tower was modest, just 20 feet tall, fitted with solar panels at the top and a small receiver. A technician showed Toma how to operate it. No passwords, just a switch and a signal. When it was complete, the workers gathered quietly beside the runway. Toma stepped forward, placed a palm over the tower's frame, and whispered a single word: "Ready." That evening, the villagers shared breadfruit and fish beneath the stars. A child climbed onto a crate and pretended to give a weather report into the tower's base. Laughter echoed across the field. The stars above Fongolais burned steady, quiet, listening. And somewhere far away, in a different city, Keanu Reeves slept without knowing that a jet had landed safely that day because of him. 2 days after the tower was activated, a storm skirted near the island. Nothing severe, just wind and sheets of rain that swept across the airstrip. But late that night, a twin-propeller cargo plane, en route from the Philippines to Guam, experienced an electrical issue and requested an emergency landing. Fongolais answered. The signal was strong, clean, immediate. The pilot, surprised by the presence of any modern infrastructure, followed the coordinates, lowered altitude, and spotted the tiny runway marked by hand-painted lights and villagers waving flashlights. The landing was smooth. When the pilot stepped out, dripping and wide-eyed, he was met by a barefoot man holding a lantern. "You made it," Toma said calmly. "Welcome," the pilot stammered. "This island, it's not even on the active charts." Toma smiled. "Still, it caught you." They helped him to the community hut, gave him tea, a woven blanket, and a place to dry his gear. No press, no records, just hospitality. By sunrise, the storm had cleared. The pilot radioed his crew and made the necessary repairs. Before departing, he walked back to the small tower, now glowing faintly in the daylight. "Who built this?" he asked Toma. Toma looked up, his face unreadable. "Someone who wanted others to land safe." The pilot squinted. "Someone from here?" Toma just shook his head. "Someone who stopped here once and listened." Back in Los Angeles, Keanu read the brief update Clara forwarded him. The engineers had sent a message through the new signal tower's logging software. First emergency use successful. Runway assisted in nighttime landing. No injuries. All systems green. He didn't reply. He simply smiled and turned the page of his journal. Under the entry marked "Dear Stranger," he added one more line. "Some stories don't need to be told, just lived." He closed the book gently. That afternoon, while walking out of a film meeting, a journalist caught him by the elevator. "Keanu, any truth to the rumor you funded a relief project in Micronesia?" He stopped, looked at her, and gave a small smile. "I think people help each other all the time. Most of the good stuff doesn't make headlines." The elevator doors opened. He stepped inside. Back on the island, the children continued their games. The airstrip remained quiet most days, but now it hummed faintly with a signal. Steady, silent, always listening. The villagers didn't talk much about who built the tower, but they would say this: "A man once landed here. He arrived tired, like many do. He left lighter, and something about him stayed behind. Not his name, not his story, but a kind of presence, a reminder that the quietest gestures are often the loudest echoes, and that sometimes the most powerful gifts are the ones given without asking for a single thing in return." The shift didn't happen with an announcement. There were no press releases, no interviews explaining a grand new direction. But to those closest to Keanu, the change was unmistakable. It began with a phone call Clara received one early morning. "Let's talk about the budget," Keanu said. She had expected a discussion about his next film deal, possibly the action thriller that had been waiting for his signature. Instead, he asked her to pull the proposal for the mentorship program they had once outlined but shelved due to studio commitments. "I want to revisit it," he said. "Not as an initiative, just as people." Within the week, he redirected funds from a commercial endorsement into a new pilot program that paired retired film crew members with young, aspiring artists from underfunded communities. It wasn't flashy. There were no hashtags, just quiet, steady support. The first mentorship circle launched in a warehouse space outside of Oakland. No banners, just coffee, folding chairs, and voices eager to be heard. Keanu didn't speak much during the first session. He sat in the back, listening to a 17-year-old girl explain how she made costumes from thrift store curtains. When the session ended, he asked her a single question: "What would help you keep going?" She looked startled, then answered, "Time. And someone who doesn't laugh." He nodded, handed her his assistant's card, and told her to send a list. "Anything under $2,000, he added with a soft smile. "I'll cover it personally." Clara watched all of it unfold without the usual machinery behind it. No cameras, no team meetings. Just a man who had started making decisions from a different place. A month later, Keanu visited a small, rural art school tucked into the hills of northern Montana. He didn't arrive with security or assistance. He took a rental car, wore a ball cap, and quietly asked the receptionist if he could speak to the students. The principal nearly dropped her coffee. He ended up sitting in on a charcoal drawing class. He said nothing for most of the hour, just watched. When a boy named Elias struggled with perspective on his landscape, Keanu sat beside him and asked if he could try. He sketched a single mountain. Elias stared at it. "How did you do that so fast?" "I just followed the shape your mind already saw," Keanu said. By the time he left, he had donated enough to keep the school running for 2 more years. Again, no press. The check came from a private trust with no signature. Back in Los Angeles, Clara took a call from a major studio exec, pushing to lock in Keanu for their next franchise sequel. The deal was massive. Guaranteed global release, top billing, creative control. Clara forwarded the script to Keanu. He read it twice, then sent a one-line reply: "It's good work, but not the work I need to do right now." Instead, he quietly accepted a role in a small theater project in downtown LA, a reimagining of an old Japanese folktale. The director was unknown. The stage sat fewer than 200 people, and Keanu showed up every night, on time, carrying his own costume bag. The audience came in slowly at first. Then word spread, not just about the performance, but about how he was in the lobby afterward, helping clean chairs, talking to the night janitor, listening to strangers describe what the story meant to them. One evening, after a performance, a man in his 60s waited by the exit door. He was quiet, holding a worn copy of a screenplay under his arm. When Keanu passed, the man stepped forward hesitantly. "I'm sorry to bother you. I saw you in my own private Idaho when I was in film school. I used to dream about stories. Then life took over." Keanu didn't rush him. He listened. The man continued, "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to say thank you for doing this small play. It reminded me that stories don't have to be big to matter." Keanu looked at the man and said softly, "I met someone once who said the same thing. He wasn't in the movies, but he knew something we forget." He didn't say Tuma's name. He didn't need to. The man nodded slowly, eyes damp. After the man left, Clara walked over from the far side of the room. She had been helping the director pack up some flyers. She looked at Keanu, studying him. "Something changed in you on that island." He glanced at her, eyebrows raised slightly. "You started listening more," she said. Keanu didn't argue. Instead, he walked over to a folding chair, sat down, and began stacking the programs from the night's performance into a neat pile. The house lights flickered off above him, leaving only the glow of the lobby lamp. Outside the theater, a young woman stood by the bus stop. She clutched a sketch pad and wore headphones. She didn't notice Keanu until he walked past. She looked up and blinked. "Were you in that play?" He nodded. "Yeah." She paused. "I liked it, especially the part where the fisherman lets the tide carry him." Keanu smiled. "Yeah, that part surprised me too." She tilted her head. "Is that what happened to you?" He paused, then answered honestly, "I think I stopped paddling and started listening to where the tide was going." The bus arrived. She stepped on board, gave him one last look, then disappeared into the night. Keanu stood alone on the sidewalk for a moment, then turned and began walking. The night air was cool. The city hummed quietly around him, not demanding anything, just existing. Somewhere in the distance, a plane passed overhead. Its blinking lights moved slowly through the clouds, on its way to somewhere else. Keanu looked up and followed it with his eyes. He thought about the island, the coconut Toma handed him, the guitar, the child drawing a camera in the sand, the letter that never needed a name. He breathed deeply. For the first time in a long while, the world didn't feel so loud, and that quiet was beginning to feel like home. The room was small, just 4 walls and a single window facing east. A soft breeze stirred the curtains. The light was warm, late afternoon, quiet. Keanu sat on a wooden stool near the center, guitar resting on his knee. It wasn't new, the wood had faded, the strings were mismatched, but he liked it that way. He didn't play anything elaborate, just the same 5 notes Toma had strummed by the fire. The rhythm was steady, gentle, like an echo from another world. For a long moment he just played. Then he paused. He looked forward, not directly into the lens, but just past it, like he was speaking to someone sitting across from him, someone close, someone who mattered. "Sometimes the story," he said softly, "isn't in the climax." He let the silence hang. "It's in the pause." Another quiet chord. Keanu glanced down, fingers still moving over the strings. "I used to think momentum was everything. Keep going, keep building, keep proving something." He gave a faint smile. "But I landed somewhere I didn't plan to go. And no one was watching. There were no trailers, no fanfare, just a man with a wrench and a question I didn't expect." He looked up. "What would you do," he asked gently, "if nobody was watching or keeping score?" The question lingered. He didn't rush the next words. "I'm still answering it, every day, every choice, I think. That's where the real story starts, when the cameras stop, when the lights go out, when it's just you and the sound of your own footsteps." He stopped playing, let his fingers rest. The guitar sat quietly against his lap. "There's something I learned out there, on that island," he continued. "Legacy isn't made from the big things. It's made from the things no one sees. The things you do because they're right, not because they'll be remembered." The wind moved the curtain again. A bird sang faintly outside the window. "I watched a child draw a dream he had never seen," Keanu said. "I saw a man keep a runway clean for someone he might never meet. I ate fish grilled over fire and listened to a song that didn't rhyme but still made me cry." He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the memory wash through him. There's a peace in that. A kind of honesty the world doesn't always celebrate, but maybe it should. He opened his eyes again. Maybe that's why I'm telling you this now. He picked the guitar back up, plucked a few more notes, then lowered it again. Life isn't about performing, it's about participating, listening, showing up for things that matter, even when no one's handing out trophies. His voice was steady but quiet. Each word felt like it had been lived before it was spoken. "If there's one thing I hope you remember," he said, "it's this. Every one of us is someone else's unexpected landing. We're all a stranger on someone's runway." He looked down, then smiled gently. "And sometimes just showing up is the story." He reached over, placed the guitar on its stand, and stood slowly. He walked toward the window, paused, then turned back, this time looking straight ahead. "Have you ever had a moment that unexpectedly changed your perspective?" He waited, not for a reply, but for the question to settle. Keanu stepped away from the window and moved to a small bookshelf tucked in the corner. It was filled with journals, not arranged for display, but worn with use. Some had scraps of paper sticking out, others had tape along the spine. He picked up one and held it for a moment, running his hand across the cover. "This one's from after I got back," he said quietly. He opened it, flipping past several pages filled with handwriting, diagrams, and quotes scribbled sideways. He stopped on a single page. It read, "Dear stranger, thank you for making me stay still long enough to feel something real." He held the page open, looking at it for a long while. "You don't always get to choose where the story changes," he said. "But sometimes, the places that slow you down are the ones that put your heart back in rhythm." He gently closed the journal. "That island Fongole gave me something I didn't know I needed. Not a lesson, not a headline, just a kind of space, a breath." He looked up again, more direct this time. "If you've been running, chasing, trying to keep up, maybe it's time to listen for the pause." His voice lowered. "Because the pause, that quiet moment when nothing seems to be happening, that's where the real story can finally speak." The cameras slowly zoomed in, framing his face against the soft light behind him. No dramatic cut, no music swell, just truth. "Tell me," he said, "have you ever had a moment that unexpectedly changed your perspective?" He leaned in slightly, as if listening. "I'd love to hear it." He took one last pause, then smiled. "And tell us, what story would you love to see next with me?" He didn't wave. He didn't say goodbye. He just stepped back, sat down, and picked up the guitar again. A simple melody floated through the room, like a memory that never asked to be remembered, but stayed anyway. And the screen slowly faded to black.